Hello, my name is Ivy, and welcome to a brand new web series called Midnight Conversations on the Patio Pacific War Edition. Because the best and most meaningful conversations happen at home, in our backyard, on the patio. And this web series is dedicated to all the history nerds, history geeks, and history dorks out there. You and I are going to have fun, and we're going to talk about everything and anything under the moon regarding the Pacific War. So if you're new to this channel, go ahead and click on the subscribe button down below so you will always get the latest updates and notifications.
For today's episode, I'm here outside my patio enjoying the cool evening breeze here in Central Texas. So today is November 11th, Monday, 2024. And in the States, here in the US, we're celebrating Veterans Day. So I decided to do a commentary video because I like to read books about military history, especially about the Second World War in the Pacific. And I want to talk about the American veterans who served during the Second World War in the Philippines. I am going to show you some of the books that I have collected over the years. Some are hard copies and some are digital copies, but I'll show you a picture as I mention these books. So English is my second language, so pardon me if I have a little script ready made for tonight's video. So let's begin. I've been living here in the States for roughly almost 20 years, and everyone seems to know that the Philippines was colonized by Spain for 300 years. But few Americans are aware that the Philippines was once an American territory for almost 50 years. In fact, I noticed that few Americans even know about Bataan and Corregidor. Those who do know about Bataan and Corregidor are either veterans from the American Navy or they belong to a more matured generation. I attended the Pacific War Conference up in Fredericksburg, Texas last year, and I also attended the annual Bataan Conference in Houston, Texas a few months ago in April. And I've also been to the MacArthur Memorial Archives in Virginia. And it's a little sad to see that while there is much discussion and media about the Second World War in Europe, there is not much traction about the Pacific War, let alone what happened in the Philippines. In fact, when Japanese foreign students come to Texas and they visit the Pacific War Museum in Fredericksburg, they are often shocked to learn about the extensive details that happened during the Second World War in the Pacific theater. But let's go back to the original topic. How did the Philippines become an American territory in the first place? Well, in 1898, Filipino General Emilio Aguinaldo was fighting a revolution against Spain. And while that was happening in the Philippines, in the other side of the globe, the Americans just won the Spanish-American War. And because they won that war, they also acquired the remaining Spanish territories, and that includes the Philippines. So the American government sent over Commander Dewey to check out their first territory in Asia. And upon arriving in Manila, Commander Dewey was shocked to realize that they were in the middle of a revolution. Now, mind you, there was no internet, no cell phone, no social media back in the day. So he didn't know that the Philippines has been fighting for its independence. And not only that, Filipino General Emilio Aguinaldo was only 2 weeks away from declaring official and complete independence from Spain. So the Americans are there at the Manila Bay. They had to do something. They immediately labeled Filipino General Emilio Aguinaldo and everyone else a rebel. Rebel. They called everyone a Filipino rebel or a Filipino insurgent. So the Americans joined the revolution, which led Filipino General Aguinaldo and his troops to run away from Manila to the mountains of northern Luzon. This led to the famous Battle of Tirad Pass, which is taught in every high school in the Philippines to this day. This battle is located in northern Luzon, and this is famous because it was led by a boy general named Gregorio del Pilar. In fact, there's a 2-hour movie about him available on YouTube. It's called Goyo, Goyo. Gregorio del Pilar was a young man around 18, 19, 20, 21 years old who was very smart, and he was a brilliant military tactician. And even though he wasn't trained in Europe, he was still really good with military, strategies. So so when the Americans were hunting down General Emilio Aguinaldo in the mountains of northern Luzon, Gregorio del Pilar famously stood up against the Americans, so General Aguinaldo had a chance to escape. Gregorio del Pilar and his troops eventually died, like in that movie 300 with Gerard Butler. And upon their death, the Americans chose not to bury their body. um, they didn't allow Filipinos to bury their bodies. So eventually, the Americans captured General Aguinaldo and forced him to surrender. But since you catch more bees with honey, the Americans wanted to stop the rebellion completely. So on June 12, 1898, they allowed they allowed us our Independence Day, which is really just independence from Spain, but it is not complete independence. And they allowed us to name General Emilio Aguinaldo as our first president, as long as he agreed to remain docile and quiet during his presidency. And he was. He was so quiet that he even survived the Second World War under the Japanese because he died in 1962. Now, some of the Filipino rebels captured during that rebellion were sent to Guam to live in exile. So, if you ever go to Guam and you meet Filipinos living there, there's a chance that they are descendants of the Filipino rebels during the American insurgency. So now the Philippines became an American territory for almost 50 years. One of the reasons why I love reading these books written by American veterans stationed in the Philippines at that time is because they offer different views about our history that is vastly different from what is printed in high school textbooks in the Philippines. For example, let me go get the book. So, for example, I have this book written by a Catholic priest in the U.S. Army. His name is Father Duffy. And he had strong opinions about the late president. I'm going to put this book here. He had strong opinions about the late president Manuel Quezon and how he mismanaged the government funds given by the Americans at that time. This sentiment is echoed by another American guerrilla officer by the name of Major Robert Lapham in his own book called Lapham's Raiders. In fact, it was only because I read the book of Father McDuffie that I realized how the name Quezon Province became known as Quezon Province. Growing up, I don't know if you had the same idea, but growing up, I always thought that the people of Quezon wanted to name their province for Manuel Quezon because they love him and admired him so much. But the truth is not something to be proud of. The truth is entirely different. Another book I wanted to show you Another book I wanted to show you is the Philippine Diaries, written by U.S. Army Major Stephen Melnick. It has a foreword from Carlos P. Romulo. If you are a history buff, then you know that Carlos P. Romulo is the first United Nations Secretary General, and he was from the Philippines, of course. So Melnick at that time was one of the staff members of General MacArthur. And Melnick is also one of the 10 Americans to ever escape a Japanese prison camp during the Second World War. I have family from Mindanao and living in Mindanao, so maybe I'm really fascinated about their escape in that Japanese prison camp in the Davao penal colony. But nonetheless, if you ever read their books, so I have the book of Stephen Melnick. He talks about his escape. I also have the book of one of the other escapees. No, not that's not him. Where is it? Oh, I have it here. One of the escapees is Sam Grasho. He also escaped from that penal camp, and I'm gonna get the other book of the other Marine who escaped with them. So this is the one of the books written by Marine Jack Hawkins. He was also one of the Americans who escaped from the Japanese prison camp in the Davao penal colony in Mindanao. Okay. So if you ever decide to pick up or read any of their books, it's a very exciting read. Personally, I thought it was like reading Indiana Jones novel set in the jungles of Mindanao. So basically, I'm gonna list the names of the 10 men who escaped from that Japanese prison camp in the Davao Penal Colony, and they are as follows: Captain Ed Diaz of the Army Air Force, Sam Gracia of the U.S. Army Air Force, and this is his book. Okay, Stephen Melnick of the U.S. Army. I'm going to show you his book again. This is his book. Melvin McCoy of the U.S. Army. No, Melvin McCoy of the U.S. Navy. He was the commander by the time he surrendered. Paul Marshall of the U.S. Army. Robert Bob Spielman of the U.S. Army. Jack Hawkins of the U.S. Marines. So this is the book of Jack Hawkins. He was the last of the 10 prisoners to pass away. Austin Schaffner of the U.S. Marines, Mike Dobovich of the U.S. Marines, and Leo Bolston of the U.S. Navy. Of all the 10 escapees, it was only Leo who was not able to return back to the United States. He was captured by Japanese soldiers in Mindanao and executed. He was tortured and then executed. So going back to the book of Major Stephen Melnick, let's get it here again. He wrote that the Philippines as an American territory was actually an expensive investment for the United States because our coastline is larger and longer than the United States, especially the mainland. So the military budget to protect the Philippines would be a financial burden, which is why the American government decided to convert the Philippines from being an American territory into being a member of the American Commonwealth, which eventually led to the gradual transitioning to Philippine independence. So there's a lot of factors that led to the transitioning from being an American territory to being an American Commonwealth member to gaining Philippine independence. But this was one of the reasons that was highlighted in his book. So we were given our independence because the Philippines was a financial burden at that time when America was entering its depression era. The Philippines has 7,100 islands. It is not a landlocked country. And because it has that many islands, Americans would have to spend a lot of their budget on building bridges. For instance, that's just one tiny thing. So, building bridges, more bridges than in the United States mainland alone. That's just one financial aspect that led to the decision of the Philippines being converted from an American territory to an American Commonwealth member. So, what is the difference? Okay, what is the difference between a territory versus a commonwealth? Let's pretend you're dating this guy and you bring him home to introduce to your grandma. And your Asian grandma looks at him and does not like him, so she ignores him all throughout dinner. That's a commonwealth. Let's pretend again that you're dating this guy, you bring him home to introduce to your grandma, and your Asian grandma looks at him and doesn't like him and says, "Hey, I don't like your boyfriend." That's a territory. So I don't know if that metaphor works for you guys. Now, let's pretend that you're dating this guy again and you introduce him to your grandma and she locks you in your room forever because she doesn't like the guy and shoots your boyfriend. Well, now that's colonialism. Okay, so I'm just joking. Okay, let's not take it seriously. It's more of a half joke. Okay, I'm just trying to show you the difference between colonialism, being an American territory, and being a member of American Commonwealth. Anyway, because the Americans were supervising us as we built our military, a lot of them were stationed in the Philippines at that time. Some recognizable ones were Wendell Fertig and Russell Volckmann. Volkmann. These two men are quite famous for history nerds out there because they were considered as the founders. They're like the unofficial founders of the United States Special Forces located in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I believe it is now called Liberty. Yeah. After the Second World War, years after the Second World War, President John F. Kennedy called on Wendell Fertig and Russell Volckmann to write about their guerrilla experiences in the Philippines in the hopes that it will be used for a different kind of warfare in the future. I have two books about Wendell Fertig, and I have also read his original manuscript, which is kept and stored in the MacArthur Memorial Archives in Virginia. He has two original manuscripts that are different from the books that are published out there. The first original manuscript was written when he was stationed in Corregidor as an army engineer. And the second manuscript was written when he was building the guerrilla movement in Mindanao. I have one book about Russell Volckmann written by Mike Guardia, and I am also proud to say that I have the book of his own autobiography called We Remain by Russell Volckmann. It is a very rare book, so if you're interested in borrowing it, you might have to go through the World Catalog. I know I had to borrow it from a university library via the World Catalog. So here's a little trivia. Do you know why he called his book title We Remain? It's because back in the day during that time, MacArthur would send boxes of supplies to different guerrillas all over the Philippines. And these supplies would usually have a sticker like matches, I don't know, soaps and stuff, but they have a sticker that says, I shall return. So when Russell Volckmann got his box of supplies from MacArthur, he decided to carve out a small bamboo, and he carved out the words "We Remain," and he told the submarine to send this back to General MacArthur. That's very ballsy. Anyway, moving on. I also have digital books of American guerrilla officer Major Lapham and his subordinate Lieutenant Ray Hunt. These two men became guerrilla leaders in Luzon after Bataan surrendered. In fact, it was these two men who mentioned about the late Filipino dictator Ferdinand Marcos in their books. Growing up as a Marcos baby in the Philippines, I've heard all kinds of stories about the late Filipino dictator Ferdinand Marcos. But I did not know what Marcos did during the Second World War. So, as an avid reader, I greatly appreciate what Mr. No, Major Robert Lapham wrote in his biography. Both Robert Lapham and Ray Hunt mentioned their interactions with Marcos during the Second World War. And, reading their book, I would say, and this is just my personal opinion, that I truly wish I met them both. Between Robert Lapham and Ray Hunt, it was Lieutenant Ray Hunt who had more to say about the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos during the Second World War. And I will say this, I am more inclined to believe his version of Marcos and the Maharlika movement during the Second World War. I'm sure there are viewers out there who may disagree with this, but this is my personal opinion, and I believe Ray Hunt. I believe the version of Ray Hunt more than the other versions that are out there. Now, moving on, I also have the book of Robert Arnold. Okay, let me go get it for you. I have this book by Robert Arnold. It's called A Rock and a Fortress, who offered a different perspective on the late Walter Cushing. I guess many of the names that I will mention in this video, I will probably say the late blank because I would say everybody has already passed away. So, Walter Cushing was one of the three Cushing brothers born in El Paso, Texas. These three brothers settled in the Philippines at that time, and later on, during the Japanese invasion and after Bataan surrendered, they became famous guerrilla officers in the Philippines. The youngest of the three Cushing brothers is James Jimmy Cushing, was the leader of the Cebu guerrilla movement. And that's how I got into this rabbit hole. I read a book about him one time because I was interested in reading what was it like for my grandpa. My late grandpa, he was a young man during the Second World War living in Cebu, and I just wondered what life was back then. What was life for him back then? So I came across the book about James Cushing, and from then on, I just started reading books about the Second World War. I jumped into this rabbit hole called the Second World War, and I'm so deep into it that there is no going back. But apparently, I've been told that I'm only at the tip of this dorky, nerdy, geeky iceberg. So I have a lot more books inside my apartment, but I'm gonna end this episode with this mega piece. This monster book, The Pacific War, which I stumbled across in a thrift bookshop in Waco, Texas. Ta-da! Look, this is a monster piece. I haven't even started it, but I was so excited when I saw this book in Waco. Okay. So that's it for today's episode. I just want to wish everybody a happy Veterans Day. I would also like to encourage my viewers to donate to the Bataan Museum located in West Virginia. I'm gonna give you the link in the comments down below. They have the largest collection of memorabilia from Bataan survivors and Corregidor survivors. And I'm also going to mention another nonprofit organization. It's called the American Defenders of Bataan and Corregidor. And they are composed of children and descendants of the survivors of Bataan and Corregidor. And the purpose of this organization is to educate the public about what happened in this important time in American history and as well as Filipino history. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed today's episode, go ahead and lick, don't lick it. Go ahead and click the like and subscribe button.